with our political affairs reporter, Moremi Mwangi, joining us live from the Supreme Court. Moremi, good afternoon. If you can just put that ruling into perspective. We understand there was a dissenting voice as well.
Well, good afternoon, Ben. Well, today there was no dissenting voice, perhaps for a clarification. What there was an independent concurrent opinion from Justice Ojwang, which of course was in concurrence with regard to if the Supreme Court had jurisdiction to entertain the particular dispute or the query that had been raised by the IEBC chair, and to, of course, give a clarification that had been sought by the IEBC chairman. And the clarification that came from the Supreme Court is that he, as the national returning officer for the presidential election, can indeed verify the contents of the Forms 34A and Forms 34B and note the errors that are there, but he has no powers whatsoever to alter the contents of these particular documents. What he is required to do is, upon identifying these discrepancies, inform the public, the candidates, and the observers about the discrepancies that are there, and of course exercise a judgment if these discrepancies do not affect the threshold of the requirement of the candidates to hit 50+1, as well as 25% of the votes in a majority of the counties. He can proceed with the announcement of the winner in that election. What is still in dispute, and I tried to get opinions of some of the legal counsel that were in that particular case at the Supreme Court, is how he ought to proceed if these discrepancies affect the threshold of the 50+1 as well as the majority of the counties. There are those that argue that the primary document for results in a presidential election is the Form 34A from the polling station, and therefore that there are those that argue that if these particular discrepancies originate from the Forms 34A and this concurrence between the IEBC chair and the candidates, that ought to be the correct position, he can proceed. But there are those that argue that in such circumstances he may need to come to the Supreme Court and seek an advisory on how to proceed. There is a dispute that we will keep looking at, and of course getting to understand the legal implications of the verdict from the Supreme Court today, Ben.
Does this leave the chairman of the IEBC, Wafula Chebukati, even as he prepares for next week's repeat election?
Well, you might say it is a clarification that, coming from the Supreme Court, came under very interesting context, because the very first question that the court had to argue out was whether they had the powers to entertain that petition in the first place, because it was neither an advisory seeking petition or an appeal emanating from a judgment of the Court of Appeal. But ultimately they argued that, given the immense public importance to this matter, and of course that judging from the current political climate, they had to adopt the jurisdiction to hear the matter here. And the clarification that has come from the Supreme Court is that the chairperson of the commission, currently Wafula Chebukati, can flag off these errors from Forms 34A and Forms 34B, but cannot alter the contents of that form. Ben.
Many thanks, Moremi Mwangi. They are reporting live from the Supreme Court of Kenya. Breaking news this hour. Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission Chairman Wafula Chebukati cannot amend the election results. He can only flag off any errors that he may, come into contact with in those results. We are keeping an eye on that story for you. We shall be putting it into more perspective later on here on KTN News Desk.